Bullies mock the quiet guy. They had no idea his father was watching. Marcus Delgado had always been the type of person who preferred shadows to spotlights. At 23, he possessed the kind of unassuming presence that made him nearly invisible in crowded rooms. His slight frame, barely 5'7", and weighing no more than 140 pounds, combined with wire-rimmed glasses and perpetually messy dark hair, created the perfect camouflage for someone who wanted nothing more than to navigate life without conflict. He had moved to Riverside Heights just 3 months ago, taking a job at Henderson Electronics downtown, and had quickly established a routine that kept him as far from trouble as possible. The neighborhood surrounding his small apartment complex was a mixed bag of working-class families, college students, and young professionals like himself. Tree-lined streets connected modest homes to small businesses, creating the kind of community where everyone eventually knew everyone else's business. Marcus preferred it that way. Predictable, quiet, manageable. Every morning, he walked the same route to the bus stop on Maple Street, passing the corner market where old Mr. Patel always waved from behind the counter, then continuing past the small park where children played before school. It was during these morning walks that Marcus first encountered the trio that would soon make his life considerably more complicated. Derek Manning was their obvious leader, a stocky 25-year-old with arms covered in cheap tattoos and a permanent sneer that suggested he'd never met a conflict he didn't enjoy. His voice carried the kind of authority that came from years of intimidating people smaller than himself. Flanking him were his loyal followers. Tommy Ricci, a lanky redhead whose nervous laughter punctuated every cruel joke, and Jake Morales, whose broad shoulders and constantly clenched fists made it clear he preferred action over conversation. The first incident had been relatively minor. Marcus was waiting at the bus stop, reading a technical manual for work, when Derek approached, with his usual swagger. "Hey there, Four Eyes," he'd called out, loud enough for the other commuters to hear. "You new around here, haven't seen your scrawny ass before." Marcus had simply nodded politely and returned to his book, hoping the interaction would end there. It hadn't. Derek snatched the manual from his hands, flipped through it mockingly, then tossed it into a nearby puddle. "Boring shit," he'd commented while his friends laughed. "Maybe try reading something with pictures next time." Marcus had retrieved his soggy manual without a word, cleaned it off as best he could, and boarded the bus when it arrived. He'd spent the entire ride staring out the window, trying to convince himself that ignoring them had been the right choice. "Just keep your head down," he told himself. "They'll get bored and move on to someone else." But they didn't move on. Over the following weeks, the encounters became more frequent and increasingly creative in their cruelty. Derek seemed to take Marcus's passive responses as a personal challenge, escalating each interaction just enough to test his limits. They would block his path on the sidewalk, forcing him to step into the street. They'd follow him into the corner market, making loud comments about losers who probably still live with their mummies, while Marcus tried to buy his morning coffee. Once, Tommy had deliberately bumped into him outside the bank, spilling Marcus's drink down the front of his work shirt and then demanding an apology for the accident. The pattern was always the same. Marcus would endure whatever humiliation they devised, clean himself up if necessary, and continue with his day. He never responded with anger, never raised his voice, never gave them the reaction they were clearly seeking. This only seemed to frustrate Derek more, leading to increasingly elaborate attempts to provoke him. What none of them knew, what nobody in Riverside Heights knew, was that Marcus's quiet demeanor masked a lifetime of training that had begun before he could properly tie his shoes. His father, Roberto Delgado, had been teaching him Krav Maga, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and traditional boxing since he was 6 years old, not as a hobby or after-school activity, but as a fundamental life skill like learning to read or drive a car. Roberto owned a small but respected martial arts academy 3 towns over, where he'd spent 30 years teaching law enforcement officers, military personnel, and serious civilian students the kind of combat techniques that weren't designed for sport or show. Marcus had grown up on the mats, absorbing not just the physical techniques but the mental discipline that made them truly effective. He could disarm an attacker with a knife, counter a chokehold in 3 different ways, and end a fight with strikes so precise they would drop an opponent without causing permanent damage. More importantly, his father had instilled in him the responsibility that came with such skills. "A true fighter knows when not to fight," Roberto would always say. "Anyone can throw a punch. It takes wisdom to know when walking away makes you stronger, not weaker." This wisdom had kept Marcus out of trouble throughout high school and college, even when faced with far more serious provocations than Derek and his friends could devise. He'd learned to read the difference between genuine threats and empty posturing, and nothing about this trio suggested they posed any real danger to anyone who didn't present themselves as an easy target. They were bullies in the most traditional sense, cowards who picked on people they perceived as weaker, but who would fold immediately when faced with real resistance. So Marcus continued his policy of non-engagement. Even as the harassment escalated, he changed his route to work twice, but they always seemed to find him. He tried leaving earlier and later, but Derek appeared to have made tracking him down into some kind of twisted hobby. The other commuters at the bus stop began avoiding eye contact when the confrontation started, clearly uncomfortable but unwilling to intervene. Mrs. Patterson from the apartment complex would shake her head sympathetically when she saw him with torn clothes or muddy shoes, but she never asked what had happened. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning in October, crisp and clear with the kind of autumn air that made walking feel like a privilege. Marcus had left his apartment 15 minutes earlier than usual, hoping to catch an earlier bus and avoid his tormentors entirely. He was congratulating himself on this small victory when he rounded the corner onto Maple Street and saw them waiting by the bus stop, clearly having anticipated his change in schedule. Well, Derek called out as Marcus approached. "Look who thinks he's smart enough to outsmart us. You really thought you could sneak past us, didn't you, you little weasel?" Marcus considered turning around and going back home, maybe calling in sick to work, but something in Derek's tone suggested this confrontation was going to happen regardless of his choices. He continued walking, hoping to reach the bus stop and the relative safety of other commuters before things got out of hand. "I'm talking to you." Derek's voice rose as Marcus drew closer. "You think you're too good to answer when someone's talking. To you?" He stepped directly into Marcus's path, close enough that Marcus could smell the stale cigarettes on his breath. "Maybe we need to teach you some manners." Behind Derek, Tommy and Jake spread out to block any potential escape routes. They'd done this before with other victims, Marcus realized. They had a system, a practiced routine for cornering their targets. Several other people at the bus stop suddenly found reasons to check their phones or study the bus schedule very intently. "I don't want any trouble," Marcus said quietly, his first words to them in weeks of harassment. "I'm just trying to get to work." Derek's eyes lit up with satisfaction at finally getting a response. "Oh, he speaks. Did you hear that, guys?" The little mouse finally found his voice. He reached out and flicked Marcus's glasses, knocking them slightly askew. "Maybe if you're real nice and ask real politely, we'll let you catch your bus. What do you say?" Marcus adjusted his glasses and remained silent, calculating distances and angles out of habit, rather than intent. Derek was standing too close, leaving himself open to a dozen different attacks. Tommy was positioned badly, weight on his back foot, and Jake was distracted by something across the street. None of it mattered because Marcus had no intention of fighting them. Not here, not in front of witnesses, not when walking away remained an option. "Nothing to say now?" Derek pressed, emboldened by Marcus's continued silence. "Maybe you need a little encouragement." He reached out and grabbed the front of Marcus's shirt, pulling him closer. "How about you get down on your knees and ask real nice? Show everyone here what kind of man you really are." The request sent a cold wave of anger through Marcus's chest, but he forced it down. "This isn't worth it," he told himself. "He's just trying to provoke you. Don't give him what he wants." He placed his hands gently on Derek's wrists, not to break free, but to show he wasn't going to comply either. "Let go of me, please," he said calmly. Derek's grip tightened. "I don't think you understand your situation here, Four Eyes. You don't get to make requests. You get to do what you're told, or things get a lot worse for you." It was at that moment that Marcus noticed the elderly man walking slowly down the sidewalk toward them. He was tall and thin, probably in his 80s, with silver hair and the careful gait of someone whose knees had seen better decades. He carried a small paper bag from the corner market and seemed focused on simply making it home without incident. Marcus recognized him as someone he'd seen around the neighborhood but had never spoken to. Derek followed Marcus's gaze and saw the old man approaching. A cruel smile spread across his face as a new form of entertainment presented itself. "Well, look what we have here," he said, releasing Marcus's shirt and turning toward the approaching figure. "Hey, old man. Yeah, you with the groceries. This is a toll road now. You want to pass through, you gotta pay up." The elderly man looked up, confusion clear on his weathered face. "Excuse me? Have you heard me, Grandpa?" Derek called out, his voice carrying that particular tone of someone who'd found a new victim to torment. "This is our sidewalk now. You want to use it? You pay the tax." Tommy and Jake began moving to flank the old man, sensing their leader's new focus. Marcus felt his chest tighten as he realized what was about to happen. "Leave him alone," he said, more firmly than he'd spoken to them before. "He's not bothering anyone." Derek turned back to Marcus with genuine surprise. "Oh, now you want to be a hero. That's interesting. Real interesting." He gestured to his friends who began moving toward the elderly man with obvious intent. "See, I think you need to learn what happens when people don't show proper respect." What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Tommy reached the old man first and, without any warning or provocation, placed both hands on his chest and shoved him backward. The elderly man, caught completely off guard and lacking the balance to recover, stumbled and fell hard onto the concrete sidewalk, his bag of groceries scattered, cans rolling into the street while he lay on his back, clearly stunned and possibly hurt. The three bullies erupted in laughter. "Did you see his face?" Jake hooted. "Thought he was just going to walk right past us like he owns the place." "Maybe next time you'll show some respect, old man," Derek added, his voice full of cruel satisfaction. The elderly man tried to push himself up, but seemed unable to coordinate his movements. He made a small sound of pain or confusion, and Marcus realized he might have hit his head on the way down. None of the other people at the bus stop moved to help him. They just stood there, frozen by their own discomfort and unwillingness to get involved. Marcus started toward the fallen man, but Derek grabbed his arm. "Where do you think you're going? We're not done with you yet." "Let me help him," Marcus said, trying to pull free. "He could be hurt." "So what if he is?" Derek's grip tightened. "Maybe that's what happens when people don't show proper respect. Maybe you should be more worried about what's going to happen to you." It was then that Marcus heard a voice from behind them, calm and controlled but carrying an authority that made everyone freeze. "Take your hands off my son." Derek turned, still maintaining his grip on Marcus's arm, and found himself facing a man who seemed to have materialized from nowhere. Roberto Delgado stood about 10 feet away, his presence somehow filling far more space than his physical form should have allowed. He was not a large man, perhaps 5'9" and built more like a distance runner than a linebacker, but there was something in his posture, his perfectly balanced stance, and especially his eyes that commanded immediate attention. "Your son?" Derek scoffed, though Marcus noticed his voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. "This little weasel is your kid. Maybe you should have taught him some manners." Roberto's gaze moved past Derek to the elderly man still lying on the sidewalk, then back to the three bullies. His expression never changed, but Marcus could feel the shift in atmosphere like a drop in barometric pressure before a storm. "I saw what you did to that old man," Roberto said quietly. "I watched you push down someone who couldn't defend himself, someone who had done nothing to you except exist in the same space." He took a single step forward, and somehow that small movement made Derek release Marcus's arm and take a step back. "And now you're putting your hands on my son." "Look, old man," Derek started, trying to reclaim his authority. "This isn't your business. Your boy here needs to learn some respect, and we're just teaching him how things work around here." Roberto looked at Marcus, a silent question in his eyes. Marcus gave an almost imperceptible shake of his head. "I chose not to fight them. Dad, this was my choice." Roberto nodded once, understanding passing between them, then turned his attention back to Derek. "My son chose not to hurt you," Roberto said simply. "That was his decision, and I respect it. But you've crossed a line now. You've hurt an innocent man, and you've put your hands on my family." He paused, letting the words sink in. "Those choices have consequences." Jake, perhaps sensing the shift in dynamics, tried to circle around behind Roberto. Without appearing to look in his direction, Roberto spoke. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." Something in his tone made Jake freeze mid-step. Derek, however, was either too proud or too stupid to recognize the danger he was in. "Oh, so now Daddy's going to fight his son's battles. This is rich. What are you going to do, tough guy? Call the cops?" "No," Roberto said, his voice never rising above conversational level. "I'm going to give you a choice. You can help that old man up, apologize to him and to my son and walk away from here, or you can find out why my son was showing such remarkable restraint in not fighting back." Derek laughed, but it sounded forced now. 3 against 1, old man, you sure you want to do this?" 3 against 1, Roberto agreed. "I almost feel sorry for you." The next few seconds would be replayed in Marcus's memory for years to come. Derek, apparently deciding that his reputation couldn't survive backing down from a middle-aged man, launched himself forward with a wild right hook aimed at Roberto's head. Roberto moved like water, flowing away from the punch, while simultaneously stepping inside Derek's reach. His left hand caught Derek's wrist, while his right struck upward, palm first, into Derek's solar plexus. The impact made a sound like a baseball bat hitting a heavy bag, and Derek folded over, gasping for air. Tommy, seeing his leader in trouble, rushed in from the side. Roberto's elbow met him halfway, catching him in the ribs with surgical precision. Tommy's forward momentum carried him past Roberto and onto the sidewalk, where he curled up around his injured side, making small whimpering sounds. Jake, to his credit, actually threw a decent punch, straight and fast, aimed at Roberto's midsection. Roberto caught the punch on his forearm, stepped forward, and drove his knee upward into Jake's thigh. Jake's leg buckled immediately, and he dropped to one knee with a cry of pain and surprise. The entire confrontation had lasted perhaps 15 seconds. Derek was still bent over, struggling to breathe. Tommy was on the ground, clutching his ribs. Jake was kneeling on the sidewalk, trying to massage, feeling back into his deadened leg. None of them appeared seriously injured, but all of them looked like they'd been hit by a truck. Roberto hadn't even broken a sweat. He straightened his shirt, looked down at the three defeated bullies, and spoke in the same calm tone he'd used throughout. "Now you're going to help that gentleman up. You're going to make sure he's not hurt. You're going to pick up his groceries, and you're going to apologize to him, to my son, and to everyone here who had to witness your shameful behavior." Derek, still gasping, managed to look up at Roberto with a mixture of pain and disbelief. Who the hell are you?" "I'm someone who taught his son that real strength doesn't come from hurting people weaker than yourself," Roberto replied. "I'm someone who knows the difference between a fighter and a bully. And I'm someone who just showed you that there's always someone stronger, always someone who won't tolerate your behavior." He gestured toward the elderly man, who was now sitting up, but still looking dazed. "Help him, now." Derek looked like he wanted to argue, but something in Roberto's eyes convinced him otherwise. Slowly, painfully, he got to his feet and shuffled over to where the old man sat. Sorry," he mumbled, offering his hand. "Let me help you up." The elderly man looked confused by this sudden change in behavior, but accepted the assistance. Derek, with obvious reluctance, began gathering the scattered groceries, while Tommy and Jake slowly got back to their feet. Roberto turned to Marcus, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You showed real wisdom today, son. Walking away from a fight takes more courage than starting one. I'm proud of you." Marcus nodded, still processing what had just happened. "I knew I could handle them, Dad, but it didn't seem worth it. They're just sad, really." "They are," Roberto agreed, watching as the three bullies finished collecting the groceries and helped the elderly man to his feet. "But sometimes sad people do dangerous things. Sometimes they cross lines that can't be uncrossed." He looked directly at Derek, who was standing nearby with his head down. "The question is whether they learn from it." Derek approached them slowly, his earlier swagger completely gone. "Look, we didn't know. We were just—" "You were just being bullies," Roberto said simply. "You found someone you thought couldn't fight back, and you decided to make his life miserable for your own entertainment. When that got boring, you attacked an innocent old man who couldn't defend himself." He paused, studying Derek's face. "The question is, what kind of person does that make you?" Derek had no answer for that. He stood there for a moment, looking smaller somehow than he had just minutes before, then turned to Marcus. I'm sorry, we won't bother you anymore." Marcus nodded acceptance but didn't speak. There wasn't really anything to say. The elderly man, now steady on his feet with his groceries secure, approached Roberto and Marcus. "Thank you," he said, his voice still shaky but sincere. "Both of you. I don't know what would have happened if—" "Nothing good," Roberto said gently. "Are you hurt? Do you need medical attention?" The old man tested his movements carefully. "I think I'm all right. Just shaken up." He looked at the three bullies who were standing nearby like scolded children. "I hope they learned something today." "We all did," Roberto replied, though his eyes remained on Derek, Tommy, and Jake. "Sometimes the most important lessons are the hardest ones to accept." The bus arrived then, its brakes hissing as it pulled up to the stop. The other commuters began boarding, shooting curious glances at the unusual scene, but apparently relieved that whatever had been happening was over. Marcus picked up his work bag and started toward the bus, then paused. "Dad, how did you know to be here?" Roberto smiled, the first time his expression had truly softened since the confrontation began. "I've been keeping an eye on you since you moved here, old habits." He nodded toward the corner market. "Mr. Patel called me a few weeks ago, said some local troublemakers were giving you problems. I've been watching from a distance, waiting to see how you'd handle it, and if I'd fought them myself, then I would have been proud of you for standing up for yourself," Roberto said. "But I'm prouder that you chose not to. That took real strength. He glanced at the three bullies, who were slowly walking away in different directions, clearly wanting to put as much distance between themselves and this corner of the neighborhood as possible. Though I'm glad they gave me a reason to teach them what real consequences look like. Marcus boarded the bus, taking a seat by the window. As it pulled away from the curb, he could see his father talking quietly with the elderly man, making sure he was truly all right. The three bullies were nowhere to be seen. Over the following days, word of the incident spread through the neighborhood with the speed that only truly dramatic events achieve. The details grew in the telling. Roberto became 10 feet tall in some versions, the bullies became armed gang members in others, but the core message remained consistent. Mess with people in this neighborhood, and there might be consequences you're not prepared for. Marcus never saw Derek, Tommy, or Jake again. He heard through the neighborhood grapevine that Derek had moved back in with his parents across town, that Tommy had gotten a job working nights to avoid being out during the day, and that Jake had started going to church with his grandmother every Sunday. Whether these changes would prove permanent remained to be seen, but at least for now they were no longer anyone else's problem. The elderly man turned out to be Walter Morrison, a retired teacher who had lived in the neighborhood for 40 years. He made a point of stopping by the corner market every morning. At the same time, Marcus caught his bus, not to talk necessarily, but to nod and exchange pleasantries. Sometimes they would share the bus ride into downtown, Walter heading to his volunteer work at the library, while Marcus went to his job at Henderson Electronics. Mr. Patel at the corner market began saving the best pastries for Marcus, refusing payment with a smile and a wave. "You are a good boy," he would say. "Good boys deserve good things." Other neighbors who had previously barely acknowledged his existence began greeting him by name, asking about his work, inviting him to neighborhood barbecues and block parties. The change wasn't just in how others treated him, Marcus realized. Something had shifted inside him as well. Not because he had fought the bullies, he hadn't thrown a single punch, but because he had been reminded of who he really was beneath the quiet exterior. He carried himself differently now, with the quiet confidence of someone who knew his own capabilities and had nothing to prove to anyone. Most importantly, he had learned something about the difference between avoiding conflict and allowing injustice. When the bullies had targeted him alone, walking away had been the right choice. But when they had hurt Walter Morrison, when they had crossed the line from harassment to genuine cruelty against someone truly defenseless, that had changed the equation entirely. His father had taught him that lesson without ever putting it into words. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is walk away. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is step forward. Wisdom lies in knowing the difference. 3 months later, Marcus was promoted to senior technician at Henderson Electronics. 6 months after that, he moved into a larger apartment closer to downtown. A year later, he met Sarah Chen at a neighborhood coffee shop, and they began a relationship that would eventually lead to marriage and a family of their own. But he never forgot the lesson learned on that October morning when 3 bullies discovered that quiet strength often runs deeper than loud aggression.